If I'm sitting on my chair here and I'm talking on the phone and it's a stressful conversation, a couple of things happen at the same time. Since I'm sitting in this position, my spine, all the muscles along my spine are relaxed, my ligaments are being stretched. When I'm talking on the phone and receiving some sort of bad message, suddenly my stress breathing starts to be activated. The stress breathing requires you to utilize your trapezius muscles, and all the muscles around your neck, they're going to be a little bit more active. Since I'm going to exaggerate, I'm using the stress breathing. If I do this enough, what happens is along my spine there is a couple of things starts to change. Some of the muscles along my spine starts to get weakened and lengthened, and some of them around my neck, they get a little bit shorter and tense because of the overuse, because of the stress breathing. So what can one do to avoid that this will affect my movement patterns? If I would, for example, stand up after a day of sitting and talking on the phone, getting stressed out, I would stand up and I would go to the gym and I would start to use my body. Now what would happen, the muscles that have been relaxed and sitting around all day long, they would not be able to be activated efficiently, relatively, to what they're supposed to be, they couldn't work as much as they're supposed to work. And the muscles which have been active all day long are going to be hyperactive. So even when you go to the gym, you're reinforcing those bad changed patterns that you've been using all day long. What can you do? Infant development exercises function as a rebooting mechanism. So when you do those infant development exercises, you essentially reboot your mechanism so your body can function the way how, and every muscle can fire up the way how it's meant to be. Infant development exercises are mimicking movements that we start our lives out with, right from conception, still in our mother's womb, and then when we are born, in early childhood, as we are developing and becoming more and more capable human beings. So as we're going through different phases in our development, certain parts of the body need to first get stronger so you can move into the next phase. For example, if I take this example, the infant development exercise, the inchworm exercise, would be very useful for me to do after a stressful conversation and sitting around all day long. So let's examine what is the inchworm exercise is for example. Inchworm exercise is all about innervating all the muscles along your spine. So all the way from the tailbone all the way to the top of your spine, all the muscles beside it need to get stronger, and they need to be innervated when someone does this so-called inchworm movement. Inchworm movement, a child would start to use and develop and work at around the age of 2 months and 3 months. That's when you can find those situations that you have a baby that can't really move, but you find the baby about 1 foot further at the end of your bed, and last time you looked, the baby was still in the middle of the bed. So that's when the baby learns how to do this little inchworming. But it's not about trying to get from A to B, it's about trying to condition the spine so it can develop enough stability, all the muscles around the spine, so the baby can stabilize the spine later when they're starting to learn how to give out force with their arms and their legs. Because babies don't have actually 4 limbs, they have 6 limbs. But out of the 6 limbs, they only can use 2. They use their head and their tail, their butt, their pelvis, as the 2 main limbs. The other limbs, the legs and the arms, the babies actually can't really control at all, because if they would be able to control it, they would be able to grab onto things and pull on things, and if that's what they would do before their spine becomes stable enough to stabilize, then they would have severe spinal injuries. That's why there's actually in the human nervous system, there is this default setting that till your muscles and the nerves are not innervated and not strengthened enough, the muscles beside your spine, you're not capable of controlling your limbs. That's why babies are so weak and their arms and legs going everywhere out of control. Because they don't have control, so they can't hang on to things, they can't give force out with their limbs. So for example, talking about this inchworm movement, a human being in a natural setting, in a traditional culture for example, would use this type of inching movement throughout their whole life. So it's not that, you know, at 2-3 months they stop, but since we would live very close to the earth, when you do hunting, when you're laying down, when you need to wrestle with your buddies and in many different situations, you would be using this kind of movement. So you constantly would be rebooting your neurological patterns that reinforce that all the muscles from the tail to the top of your head, they fire up in a certain sequence to stabilize your spine. So now, as you're spending your life in a less and less humane environment, when you do things which are less and less mimicking how human body meant to function, more and more you need these rebooting mechanisms, so you can keep pulling yourself back to a certain pattern that your body is supposed to use to be able to stabilize its structure. So that is why infant development exercises are so important, because they reboot your nervous system, so your bad patterns that you learn throughout unhumane movements or stresses, you can reset back to normalcy. So further you're removed from your childhood activities, unless you've done these kind of things in your life, more you need them, and usually the longer it takes to really reset them. So you might notice if you do an infant development exercise right before something very dynamic, many times people notice that they perform much better. So, and more complicated of a time you have with a certain movement, infant development movement, more likely you really need that one. So as you're going through some of these movements and you realize you're better at one and really suck at another, you need to really work on the one that you're really bad at, because that is the pattern structure which is messed up for you. And the more you work on that, more that structure itself would reinforce your capabilities in every other movement that you do as a human being. So this is about the basics about infant development exercises.